Imagine a hidden truth buried at the heart of the earliest scriptures, a truth that has been obscured by centuries of tradition and translation. Many of us grew up hearing reassuring stories of heaven and hell, simple moral landscapes that promised reward for the righteous and punishment for the wicked. Yet there is an older realm described in the Bible that predates the fiery imagery of hell and the pearly gates of heaven, a shadowy world that appears in the earliest texts and underlies much of the biblical understanding of death. It is called Sheol, the underworld of the ancient Hebrews, and its presence challenges everything we thought we knew about the afterlife. When we confront the descriptions of Sheol, we begin to realize that our modern beliefs rest on layers of interpretation that hide a far more unsettling view of what lies beyond the grave. In Sheol, all souls descend regardless of their deeds. Kings and beggars, prophets and sinners share the same dark destiny. There is no distinction between the righteous and the wicked in this place. No reward, no torment, only a languid existence in the depths of the earth. This notion was so foreign to later theologians that they reshaped it into the hell and heaven we recognize today. Yet the biblical texts preserve Sheol as a distinct realm, and by exploring it, we can recover an understanding of death that is both ancient and unsettling. To walk this path, we must set aside the familiar images of flames and angels and allow ourselves to be guided by the verses that speak of darkness, silence, and oblivion. Each line will draw us deeper into a forgotten world where the dead dwell in shadow and the living fear to tread. Our journey into Sheol will cross the boundaries of time and culture. We will compare this Hebrew underworld with the Greek Hades, the Sumerian Kur, the Mesoamerican Mictlan, and the Egyptian Duat. These realms share common themes yet differ in crucial ways, and by placing Sheol among them, we can appreciate its unique character. We will examine how the ancient Israelites understood the human soul and how this belief evolved over centuries. We will also trace the transformation of Sheol into the hell of later Judaism and Christianity, a transformation influenced by Persian and Greek ideas of judgment and retribution. Through this exploration, we hope to uncover the roots of our own beliefs and confront the deeper question that lingers at the heart of the human experience. What happens when we die? The story of Sheol is not just a scholarly curiosity. It has the power to shake the foundations of faith and to open the mind to new possibilities. If Sheol represents a place of universal descent where all souls fade into silence, then the concepts of moral reward and punishment may be later additions to a more ancient narrative. This realization can be disturbing, for it suggests that the universe may not operate according to our desire for cosmic justice. It invites us to consider whether our ethical choices have their reward in this life rather than in a distant hereafter. It also challenges us to think more deeply about what it means to live well in the face of an uncertain future. By taking Sheol seriously, we do not lose our faith. Rather, we enrich it with layers of history and perspective. This investigation will not be an exercise in dry exegesis. It will be a voyage of the imagination. We will descend into the underworld with the poets of the Psalms, listen to the lamentations of Job, and stand at the crossroads of myth and history. We will walk with the ancients as they buried their dead and invoked the gods of the underworld. We will stand in awe before the darkness that they saw, and we will emerge with a deeper appreciation of the human need to make sense of death. The path will be both terrifying and enlightening, and by the end we hope to see Sheol not merely as a place of fear, but as a mirror reflecting our own mortal condition. Before we begin this descent, we must prepare ourselves. We must leave behind preconceived notions about what happens after death, and adopt the mindset of those who wrote the earliest biblical texts. We must be willing to entertain the possibility that our ancestors understood death differently, that their world was filled with shadows and ambiguities that we have forgotten. As we proceed, we will draw on archaeology, linguistics, and comparative mythology to illuminate the passages that speak of Sheol. The journey will require patience and contemplation, but the reward will be a richer understanding of the human soul and its destiny. Let us then step through the veil of time and enter the dark realm that lies beneath the pages of Scripture. Chapter 1. Sheol in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, Sheol appears as a proper noun that denotes the abode of the dead. Unlike the later concept of hell, which is a place of punishment, Sheol is described as a vast pit or cavern under the earth where all the dead are gathered. The word Sheol occurs dozens of times in the Psalms, the prophets, and the wisdom literature, and each occurrence adds a shade of meaning. The dead are said to go down to Sheol, as if descending into a subterranean chamber. When Jacob believes his son Joseph is dead, he laments that he will go down to his son, mourning into Sheol. The idea here is not of fiery torment, but of a reunion with the family in the shadowy depths. This understanding reveals a worldview in which death is a universal fate that cannot be escaped, only accepted. Sheol is often paired with the Hebrew term for the grave, but the two are not identical. The grave is the individual tomb where a body is laid to rest, while Sheol is the collective realm where the spirits of the dead reside. The imagery is spatial. The grave is a hole in the ground. Sheol is the great cavern beneath. The ancients did not separate the soul from the body in the way later philosophers did. For them, the life force seeped downward with the corpse and joined the shadow people who inhabited Sheol. There was no moral judgment attached to this process. It was a natural descent. The prophets used the inevitability of Sheol to remind the proud that their fate was the same as that of the humble. Sheol swallowed kings and peasants alike, serving as the great equalizer of humanity. The Psalms provide some of the most vivid descriptions of Sheol. In the poetry of ancient Israel, we hear voices crying out to be delivered from going down to the pit. The pit here is Sheol itself, a place of silence where the dead cannot praise the Lord. One psalmist asks whether those in Sheol can give thanks or declare faithfulness. The implied answer is no. Once a person is in Sheol, there is no more worship, no more singing. This is a startling idea for anyone who expects death to lead to a grand choir of heavenly praise. In this older view, Sheol is the end of religious practice, a realm of silence where even God's presence is faint or absent. It is a sobering reminder that not all ancient faith traditions promised an afterlife of bliss. The book of Job also speaks of Sheol in chilling terms. Job laments that his life is fleeting and that he will soon go to the land of darkness and deep shadow. He describes it as a land of gloom, like thick darkness, a land of deep shadow without order, where light is as darkness. These evocative lines depict Sheol as a chaotic space where the normal boundaries of day and night are dissolved. It is a realm where the social order has no meaning, where the human distinctions between rich and poor vanish. Job sees in Sheol an escape from his suffering, but also an annihilation of his identity. His words resonate with the fear that death might be the great equalizer not only in status, but also in consciousness. In Proverbs, we find aphorisms that use Sheol as a cautionary image. The wise teacher warns that the path of the adulteress leads to Sheol and that her house sinks down to the shades. This does not necessarily mean that immorality leads to eternal torment, but rather that certain behaviors lead to an early grave and a premature descent to the underworld. The emphasis is on the consequences in this life rather than a cosmic punishment. This practical application demonstrates that Sheol served as a moral reminder without invoking eternal damnation. The fear of Sheol was the fear of losing one's life and being cut off from the community, not the fear of burning in fire. Taken together, these passages build a picture of Sheol as a solemn and shadowy realm. It is under the earth, away from the light of the sun and the presence of God. It is a place where existence continues, but in a diminished state. There is no joy, no activity, only a kind of sleep or half-life. The ancients spoke of it with dread, but also with resignation. They knew they could not escape it, and thus they lived with the knowledge that all roads lead to the same destination. This recognition shaped their ethics and their rituals. It also raises questions for us. Can we accept an afterlife that is not a reward or punishment, but simply a shadow? How would such a view change the way we live? Chapter 2. A realm of silence and forgetfulness. One of the most striking aspects of Sheol is its absolute silence. The Hebrew writers often contrast the noise of life with the stillness of the underworld. In life we speak, sing, argue, and pray. In Sheol there is no voice. The psalmist pleads with God not to let his enemies rejoice when he goes down to the pit, because in Sheol who can give praise? This rhetorical question underscores the belief that the realm of the dead is devoid of worship. Silence implies the cessation of relationship with the living and with the divine. It is not the silence of peaceful rest, but of severed connection. This motif resonates with modern fears of isolation and loneliness. To think of eternity as an unending silence is to confront the possibility that our existence might end not with a bang, but with a whisper. In Sheol, memory itself fades. The ancients believed that the dead are cut off from the events of the world and from the thoughts of the living. Ecclesiastes states that the dead know nothing, they have no further reward, and their memory is forgotten. The author goes on to describe how love, hate, and envy have all perished in Sheol, and there is no portion for them in anything that happens under the sun. Forgetfulness here is not only the forgetting of the dead by the living, but also the loss of personal memory by the dead themselves. To descend into Sheol is to lose one's history. In a culture that valued ancestral memory, this was a tragic fate. It meant that the dead were not only cut off physically, but also erased from the story of their people. Dust and darkness are other images associated with Sheol. The phrase "dust returns to dust" conveys the physical aspect of death. The body decays and becomes part of the earth. Sheol, however, is more than decomposition. It is a realm of shadow, where dust becomes a metaphor for desolation. The prophets warn that the proud will be brought down to dust, and that those who trust in their wealth will lie down with worms in the pit. The motif of dust emphasizes the humiliation and vulnerability of humanity. It reminds us that no matter how high we rise, we will return to the basic elements. Darkness, on the other hand, symbolizes the absence of illumination, both physical and spiritual. In Sheol, there is no light to guide the soul or to reveal truth. This double imagery of dust and darkness paints a bleak picture, one that the modern mind might find hard to reconcile with beliefs in an eternal paradise. The fear of oblivion that Sheol evokes is arguably more terrifying than the fear of punishment. Hell, with its flames and demons, at least offers a sense of narrative justice. Sheol offers nothing but a shadowy existence. This fear taps into a deep human anxiety, the fear of ceasing to be, of having one's consciousness extinguished. Philosophers throughout history have grappled with this idea. Epicurus argued that we need not fear death, because when we are, death is not, and when death is, we are not. But such reasoning does little to alleviate the dread of non-existence. The biblical portrayal of Sheol forces us to sit with that dread, to imagine a future where we are no longer present even to ourselves. It invites us to value the present moment because the future is uncertain and perhaps empty. Another aspect of Sheol is the absence of divine presence. In the Hebrew imagination, the dead are no longer in the land of the living, where God's blessings are experienced. They are beyond the reach of covenantal relationship. The psalmists often ask God to deliver them from Sheol so that they may continue to praise. The implication is that praise and relationship with the divine are privileges of the living. This does not mean that God cannot reach Sheol. Some passages suggest that God knows what is in the depths. Nevertheless, the normative experience of the dead is separation. This raises theological questions about the extent of divine grace and the nature of life after death. If Sheol is outside of God's relational presence, then salvation must be something that happens among the living or something that transforms Sheol itself. Considering these descriptions, we see that Sheol is not merely a static backdrop, but a character in the drama of the Bible. It represents silence, forgetfulness, dust, darkness, and separation. It is a place where existence continues without content. It challenges us to think about the meaning of life if there is no narrative closure after death. Is life valuable because of what comes after, or is it valuable in itself? Does the threat of Sheol call us to live more fully or to despair? Ancient Israel wrestled with these questions in its liturgy and literature. Today, we can engage with Sheol not to adopt its view, but to deepen our appreciation for the diverse ways humanity has grappled with mortality. Chapter 3. Sheol and the Nations. To place Sheol in a broader context, we can compare it with other ancient underworlds. The Greeks envisioned Hades, a somber realm under the earth where souls dwelt as shades. Like Sheol, Hades was neutral. It was not inherently a place of punishment. Heroes and villains alike went there. The Greek poets described it as a shadowy plane where the souls of the dead retain little of their former vitality. Odysseus in the Odyssey visits the dead and finds them eager for a taste of blood to regain some consciousness. This emphasis on blood and remembrance differs from the Hebrew view, but underscores a shared sense of the dead as weakened spirits. The Greeks later developed Tartarus for the worst offenders and the Elysian Fields for the blessed, indicating a moral evolution similar to the transition from Sheol to hell and heaven. In ancient Mesopotamia, the underworld was called Kur, or Irkalla. It was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal and served as the final destination for all mortals. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes the dead as wearing feathers like birds and eating dust. The descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld tells of 7 gates and a fixed law that all who enter do not return. This parallels the biblical notion of Sheol as a place of no return. The Sumerian underworld, however, had a complex bureaucratic structure with different levels and judges. While there was some differentiation between those who received proper burial rites and those who did not, the overall tone was one of gloom. This suggests that the concept of a dark underworld was common across the ancient Near East. Across the ocean in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs envisioned Mictlan, a 9-layered underworld governed by the god Mictlantecutli and the goddess Mictlantecuhtli. The journey to Mictlan was arduous. The dead had to traverse rivers, mountains, and winds, assisted by a loyal dog that accompanied them in life. Mictlan was not a place of punishment, but a resting place for most souls. There were other afterlives for warriors and women who died in childbirth, but the majority found themselves in this underworld of bones and darkness. The belief in a challenging journey reflects a different aspect of the afterlife. Not a passive descent, but an active passage. It adds nuance to our understanding of Sheol, which lacks such detailed geography. The Egyptians had a rich belief system around the underworld called Duat. The dead undertook a journey through a series of gates, guided by spells from the Book of the Dead. Their hearts were weighed against the feather of truth by the god Anubis. If the heart was lighter, the soul continued to the field of reeds, a paradise. If heavier, it was devoured by Ammit. Unlike Sheol, the Duat included moral judgment and the possibility of bliss or annihilation. This moral element influenced later Jewish and Christian eschatology. Yet the presence of an underworld journey and the concept of judgment show that the Egyptians, like the Israelites, sought to understand death through narrative and ritual. The similarities and differences among these underworld myths reveal that the human mind repeatedly returns to themes of descent, shadow, and separation. Whether the realm is neutral, like Sheol and Hades, or moral, like Duat, the underworld serves as a boundary between the living and the dead. It is a place to which all must go, but it can be understood as temporary or permanent. By comparing these myths, we gain perspective on Sheol's unique features, its silence, lack of moral differentiation, and its deep integration into the Hebrew worldview. We also see how later developments in various cultures introduced judgment and reward, perhaps to satisfy the desire for cosmic justice. Understanding Sheol in this comparative framework helps to demystify it and to appreciate its complexity. It is neither an early version of hell nor a mere synonym for the grave. It is part of a wider pattern of human thought about death and the beyond. Each culture shaped its underworld to reflect its values and fears. The Hebrew people emphasized the universal fate and the reality of silence. The Greeks emphasized remembrance and the boundary between shades and the living. The Mesopotamians emphasized the finality of descent. The Egyptians introduced a moral dimension. By studying these variations, we can see how Sheol occupies a specific place in the mosaic of ancient beliefs and how it influenced later developments. Chapter 4. From Sheol to Hell. The idea of Sheol as a neutral abode gradually evolved as Israelite religion encountered new influences. During the exile and post-exilic period, the Israelites came into contact with Persian Zoroastrianism, which taught a dualistic universe with a heaven and a hell. Zoroastrians believed in a final judgment where souls are weighed and sent either to the house of song or to a place of punishment. This notion of cosmic morality introduced a new dimension to the Israelite understanding of the afterlife. The apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period reflects these influences. Books like Daniel and Enoch speak of resurrection, judgment, and eternal destinies. The righteous are resurrected to everlasting life, and the wicked to everlasting contempt. This marks a significant departure from the earlier Sheol, where all shared the same fate. Another influence came from Hellenistic philosophy. Greek thought emphasized the immortality of the soul and the need for purification. The concept of the soul's immortality lent itself to ideas of reward and punishment beyond the grave. When Hellenistic culture spread across the Eastern Mediterranean, Jewish thinkers engaged with these ideas. The result was a synthesis in which Sheol was reimagined. The word Gehenna, originally the name of a valley outside Jerusalem associated with child sacrifice and later with garbage burning, came to symbolize a place of fiery punishment. The imagery of fire and worms eating the flesh appears in prophetic texts and becomes associated with Gehenna. The Talmud and later rabbinic literature further elaborate on the idea of a purgatorial hell where souls are cleansed before ascending. This development shows a shift from a shadowy underworld to a more vivid and moralized afterlife. The New Testament continues this evolution. Jesus speaks of Gehenna as a place where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. He uses this image to warn of the consequences of sin. At the same time, he speaks of a kingdom of heaven prepared for the righteous. The dichotomy between reward and punishment becomes more pronounced. The book of Revelation describes a lake of fire for the devil and his followers, as well as a new heaven and earth for the faithful. The resurrection of the dead, which was a later addition to Jewish belief, becomes central to Christian eschatology. The notion that the dead will rise and be judged emphasizes a linear understanding of history culminating in final justice. In this framework, Sheol becomes a temporary holding place or disappears entirely, replaced by the binary of heaven and hell. Early Christian writers further developed the concept of hell as a place of eternal torment. Influenced by Greek philosophy and Roman legal thinking, they imagined hell as a prison where divine justice is enforced. The theologian Augustine described hell as a state of perpetual separation from God, while Dante, in his Divine Comedy, depicted it as a series of circles where sinners suffer punishments matching their sins. These elaborations shaped the medieval imagination and our modern cultural imagery of hell. The original Sheol, with its silence and neutrality, was largely forgotten or relegated to academic study. Yet elements of Sheol lingered in the idea of limbo or purgatory, places where souls were neither damned nor blessed, but waited. This illustrates how religious concepts evolve by absorbing and reinterpreting earlier beliefs. This evolution from Sheol to hell demonstrates how cultures reinterpret their sacred traditions to address new moral and theological concerns. The ethical desire for justice and the hope for ultimate meaning require more than a shadowy underworld. A morally indifferent afterlife may feel unsatisfactory for those who suffer injustices. The introduction of judgment addresses this by promising that the wicked will not ultimately prosper. At the same time, it introduces fear and control into religious practice. The threat of hell has often been used to encourage obedience. Understanding that hell evolved from a neutral Sheol can help modern readers question how much of their belief is rooted in the earliest scriptures and how much is later interpretation. Reflecting on this transformation allows us to appreciate the diversity within our own traditions. The Bible is not a monolithic text with a single view of the afterlife, but a collection of writings spanning centuries and cultures. In some parts, it speaks of Sheol as a neutral pit. In others, it hints at resurrection and judgment. Later interpreters built systems on these hints. Recognizing this diversity can free us from rigid dogmas and open us to a more nuanced faith. It encourages us to explore our beliefs with curiosity rather than fear. The journey from Sheol to hell is not just a historical shift, but a mirror of humanity's evolving understanding of justice, mercy, and the unknown. Chapter 5. The Terrifying Truth. The concept of Sheol may seem bleak, but its truth lies in its honesty about the human condition. It portrays death not as a theatrical punishment or reward, but as a real cessation of life's activities. This honesty can be terrifying because it strips away comforting fantasies and confronts us with our mortality. Many people today prefer to believe in an afterlife that aligns with their sense of fairness. They envision reunion with loved ones, eternal peace, or even endless improvement. Sheol offers none of these comforts. It tells us that life may end in silence. This truth is frightening, but also liberating. It invites us to invest meaning in our present actions rather than deferring happiness to a future beyond our control. It urges us to find purpose in the here and now. The fear of non-being has haunted philosophers and poets for millennia. Unlike the fear of pain or of moral failure, the fear of ceasing to exist touches the very core of our identity. We cannot imagine our own absence because imagination requires a thinking subject. Sheol symbolizes that absence. It is a metaphor for the blank that follows life. When we contemplate it, we are confronted with our limitations. We might respond by clinging to beliefs that promise immortality or by denying the reality of death altogether. Alternatively, we can embrace the mystery and find meaning within our finite experience. The terrifying truth of Sheol forces us to reconcile with the possibility that there may be no continuation, and that such reality makes our choices all the more significant. Some theologians argue that Sheol's darkness reveals a deeper aspect of divine justice. Instead of envisioning God as a torturer, they see God allowing humans to pass into non-existence when they sever their connection with life. In this view, Sheol is not a punishment, but a consequence of alienation. Those who embrace life and cultivate compassion already participate in the divine realm here. Those who withdraw into selfishness cut themselves off from the source of being. After death, this separation solidifies. There is no eternal torment, only the fading of existence. This interpretation resonates with modern spiritual perspectives that emphasize experiential salvation in the present. It reframes the terrifying truth as a call to awaken now, rather than rely on future recompense. The existential dread that Sheol evokes can also foster empathy. If all of us face a similar destiny of silence and forgetfulness, then our differences in status and wealth become insignificant. The knowledge that kings and beggars meet in the underworld can inspire compassion in the land of the living. The prophets of Israel often use the image of Sheol to humble the proud and uplift the poor. The terrifying truth that our possessions and achievements will vanish can motivate us to invest in relationships and virtues that have intrinsic value. It can also break down artificial barriers created by social hierarchies. Sheol is the great equalizer that reminds us of our shared humanity. In modern times, we have attempted to escape the terror of Sheol through technology and distraction. We fill our lives with noise, entertainment, and work to avoid contemplating the end. Medical advances prolong life, and digital media offer a sense of immortality through social presence. Yet these strategies cannot erase the fact that each of us will die. The truth of Sheol remains. Confronting this truth can be a catalyst for authentic living. It can lead to deeper relationships, meaningful projects, and courageous decisions. The terror becomes a teacher that guides us toward what matters. By facing Sheol, we do not become morbid. We become more alive. Ultimately, the terrifying truth of Sheol is that it is part of our story whether we like it or not. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. Instead of treating it as an unwanted guest, we can welcome it into our conversations about life and ethics. Doing so can enrich our spirituality and deepen our compassion. The ancient Hebrews did not shy away from Sheol. They named it, wrote about it, and integrated it into their theology. We can learn from their example. In the face of the unknown, we can choose honesty over denial, courage over fear, and community over isolation. By acknowledging Sheol, we embrace the full spectrum of human experience. Chapter 6. Myth and Science. At first glance, Sheol might appear as nothing more than a myth, a relic of an ancient worldview. However, myths serve as vessels for truths that are not easily expressed through simple statements. They encode experiences and insights in narrative form. The myth of Sheol expresses the universal human encounter with death and the attempt to find words for the inexpressible. It captures the sense of a boundary beyond which language fails. Modern science, with its focus on empirical observation, does not address the subjective experience of death. Yet it can complement the myth by revealing how organisms end and by mapping the processes of decay. Science can tell us when brain activity ceases, but not what it feels like to cease. Myth fills that gap with imagery that resonates with our emotions. The field of cognitive science explores how humans create narratives to make sense of their lives. Our brains are wired for story. When faced with the blankness of death, we construct narratives of underworlds, heavens, and reincarnations. These narratives vary across cultures, but share common motifs: journeys, gates, rivers, trials. Sheol fits this pattern, even as it breaks it by lacking elaborate details. This minimalist myth may reflect an early stage of myth-making or a distinct cultural approach that emphasizes acceptance over embellishment. Anthropologists studying death rituals note that communities use stories to manage grief and to maintain social cohesion. Sheol may have functioned in ancient Israel as a way to frame loss and to remind the community of its mortality. Archaeological discoveries shed light on the beliefs that surrounded Sheol. Burial practices in ancient Israel show a concern for proper interment and family tombs. The deceased were often laid to rest with their ancestors, sometimes in caves that symbolically represented the entry to the underworld. The presence of grave goods indicates a belief in some form of continuation, perhaps not in Sheol, but in the sense of being remembered. In neighboring cultures, elaborate tombs and pyramids reflect a belief in an afterlife with detailed geography. The absence of such structures in early Israelite contexts supports the idea of Sheol as a more abstract concept. Yet as time progressed, Israelite tombs became more ornate, suggesting shifts in belief. This interplay between myth and archaeology enriches our understanding of how Sheol functioned within its culture. Comparative mythology also reveals how different cultures influence one another. As the Israelites interacted with neighboring peoples, they adopted and adapted concepts. Some scholars argue that the idea of resurrection in Judaism may have been influenced by Persian and Egyptian beliefs. The adoption of a moralized afterlife shows how myths evolve in response to new contexts. This evolution does not negate the value of earlier myths like Sheol. Instead, it highlights the dynamic nature of human belief. By studying these shifts, we gain insight into how communities negotiate change while maintaining identity. We see that myth and science are not antagonists, but partners in the quest for understanding. Sheol's minimal narrative can also be seen as an invitation to introspection. Without a detailed map of the afterlife, the focus remains on the present. The ancients used this myth to emphasize moral behavior in daily life. Modern readers can interpret Sheol as a metaphor for the oblivion that awaits all human achievements. This does not mean that achievements are meaningless, but it underscores their transience. The knowledge that monuments crumble and memories fade can inspire humility. It can also encourage a focus on acts that contribute to the common good. Science teaches us that the universe is vast and that human life is fragile. Myth reminds us that this fragility calls for compassion and connection. Integrating myth and science requires respect for both. We can study the evolutionary benefits of belief in an afterlife while honoring the profound emotional experiences that such beliefs address. We can acknowledge the historical development of Sheol and still appreciate its poetic power. When we allow these disciplines to converse, we enrich our understanding of what it means to be human. We see that myths like Sheol are not lies to be discarded, but mirrors reflecting our deepest anxieties and aspirations. They invite us to explore the unknown with curiosity and to find meaning even in the face of silence. Chapter 7. Modern Parallels. In contemporary societies, the afterlife is often framed in terms of heaven and hell or is dismissed altogether. Few people think about Sheol, yet the concept surfaces in our psychology in surprising ways. The fear of being forgotten, of fading into obscurity, is a modern manifestation of the Sheol motif. We seek to leave legacies through social media, art, progeny, and achievements. Our longing for likes and followers can be seen as a desire to resist oblivion. The digital age offers the illusion of permanence, but digital footprints can be erased with a single server failure. Sheol looms as a reminder that even data is fragile. This awareness can lead us to question where we place our hope. The modern obsession with youth and health can also be interpreted as a reaction to the specter of Sheol. We invest billions in anti-aging products, fitness regimes, and diets in the hope of delaying death. Yet death remains inevitable. The ancient Hebrews did not have the luxury of such distractions. Their acceptance of Sheol may have fostered resilience. Today, we can learn from them by acknowledging mortality instead of avoiding it. Doing so may lead to a more balanced approach to life, one that celebrates health without denying the end. Our funeral practices reflect a tension between remembering and forgetting. Some cultures favor cremation with ashes scattered, symbolizing a return to nature. Others maintain elaborate tombs. The rise of green burials and memorial forests suggests a shift towards ecological integration. These practices echo Sheol's earthbound imagery. They recognize that we come from dust and return to dust. They challenge us to reconsider how we honor our dead and what we hope to achieve through memorialization. The Sheol narrative encourages a communal remembrance rather than an individual immortality. In literature and film, the theme of the underworld persists. Stories of characters entering a shadow realm to rescue loved ones or to confront their past draw on ancient motifs. Modern adaptations often include moral choices and personal growth, blending Sheol's neutrality with later concepts of judgment. These narratives resonate because they reflect our inner journeys. We all have moments when we descend into personal darkness, facing depression, trauma, or existential crisis. In that sense, Sheol becomes a psychological metaphor. Recognizing this allows us to use ancient myths as tools for understanding our own experiences. Philosophers and psychologists speak of the human need for meaning. Viktor Frankl observed that those who have a why to live can endure almost any how. When confronted with Sheol, the need for meaning becomes acute. If there is no afterlife reward, then meaning must be found within life itself. Some find it in relationships, others in creativity or service. The Sheol narrative pushes us to articulate our values and to live by them. It reminds us that meaning is not given from without, but created through engagement with the world. This shift from expectation to responsibility can be empowering. Finally, Sheol calls us to reflect on the collective. In a world facing climate change, pandemics, and social upheaval, our survival depends on cooperation. The knowledge that we all share a common fate can foster solidarity. We may not be able to avoid Sheol, but we can choose to make life more just and joyful. By working together, we can create communities that support the vulnerable and celebrate diversity. The underworld ceases to be a threat when we fill the world above with kindness. The ancient myth thus finds new relevance as a call to action. Epilogue. Our exploration of Sheol has taken us from the depths of ancient texts to the forefront of modern reflection. We have seen how a single word can carry layers of meaning across millennia. Sheol is more than a place. It is a symbol of the human confrontation with death, a confrontation that has inspired fear, humility, and wisdom. It reminds us that the afterlife has not always been imagined as a cosmic courtroom. For the ancient Hebrews, the afterlife was a shadow. Recognizing this can free us from simplistic dichotomies and open us to a more nuanced appreciation of our heritage. We have compared Sheol to the underworlds of Greece, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and Egypt. Each culture offered its own answer to the mystery of death. Sheol stands out for its starkness, its refusal to moralize. We traced the evolution of Sheol into hell as new ideas entered the biblical tradition. This evolution shows that beliefs are not static. They grow and change as cultures interact. Understanding this process can help us approach our own beliefs with humility and curiosity. We face the terrifying truth that Sheol presents, the possibility that death leads to silence and oblivion. We saw how this truth can inspire us to live more fully and to value the present. We considered modern parallels where the fear of being forgotten drives our actions. We discussed how Sheol's message can foster empathy, solidarity, and responsibility. The underworld may be dark, but it can illuminate our path by highlighting what matters most. As we close this journey, we are left with questions rather than answers. What do we believe happens after death? How do those beliefs shape our lives? Are we motivated by fear or by love? Sheol invites us to ponder without rushing to conclusions. It whispers from the ancient pages that it is acceptable not to know, that uncertainty can be fertile ground for wisdom. It reminds us that each generation interprets the unknown in its own way. The connection between Sheol and our own story is personal. Each of us must face the reality of mortality. We can ignore it, fear it, romanticize it, or accept it. The choice is ours. The ancient Hebrews left us a word that encapsulates their view, Sheol. By engaging with it, we honor their honesty and their courage. We also enrich our own spiritual landscape. We may not adopt their belief, but we can integrate its lessons. In the end, the exploration of Sheol is an invitation to live deeply. It calls us to love, to create, and to seek justice while we have breath. It challenges us to be present for each other in the face of the unknown. It promises no reward beyond the satisfaction of a life well lived. It asks us to make peace with the darkness so that we can better appreciate the light. That is the enduring legacy of Sheol, the biblical underworld whose terrifying truth has the power to transform our understanding of life and death.